But even worse than that, there was a season when I struggled with a behavior that felt so mortifying. It was so embarrassing to even admit to myself, let alone my recovery team. Welcome to the Radiant Rebellion podcast. My name is Rachel St. Germain, your host, and I am a mindset and body image coach who is obsessed with helping women stop letting darkness write their stories so they can own the radiant story God has for them. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my recovery journey. It's actually part 3 of a series that I'm doing to let other people in on my background. In my past, I struggled with such a harsh inner critic, and there were so many lies and limiting beliefs that I was believing about myself that caused me to feel super insecure all the time. A lot of these personal insecurities, some of my childhood experiences, my natural wiring, and the messaging and circumstances around me all played into a struggle that really took over my life for a while. As I mentioned in part 1 and part 2, I developed an eating disorder at the age of 18 as I was entering into college. In part 1, I laid the foundation of what actually set me up for realizing that I had a problem and needed to seek some help. And then in part 2, I started to talk a little bit about what I did after I realized, oh gosh, things aren't great and I need to change things. In part 2, I also talked a lot about the things that led to the development of my eating disorder in the first place. If you haven't caught part 1 or part 2, I've included the links to those videos down below in the show notes. Go ahead and push pause now if you haven't seen them and check them out first so that you have the background. But in this video, part 3, I want to talk about recovery itself. I'm going to be touching on the pitfalls, the things that held me back, the things that helped me fight forward. I'll talk about Quasi recovery, and then also that stage in my recovery where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I am going all in, no matter the cost. And part of that cost was weight restoration, which can be a really hard part for someone who's going through recovery. So I wanted to touch on some of the aspects of that as well to give you some insight and advice for fighting forward if that's where you find yourself. So in the previous videos, I mentioned that once I realized I have a problem and I need to get some help, my first step was to create a team of people around me, people who knew the eating disorder well and could actually help me know the things that I didn't know so I could heal what was broken. In the last video, I talked about how I entered into outpatient therapy, which was such a huge first step to be able to really dive into the underlying issues that had led to the eating disorder. But my time in outpatient was very limited because my insurance only allowed me to be there for, 2 or 3 months or so. But it set the foundation, and I found a therapist, one of the therapists that was working with us at Woodleaf. And thank God that she had room for me. Honestly, I know it was so much a part of God's plan for my journey because this person was perfect for me. When you're in recovery, it's kind of like you don't have a choice. You have to face the hard things that you had been running from. Because all of those things are the real issues, the reason that you're struggling. The eating disorder is only a symptom of a much bigger problem. So needless to say, therapy can be really scary, and it's very emotionally exhausting. But because I had the right person, I felt so at home. It was almost like I was excited to go there with someone. It hurts to deal with your issues or to see the things that you'd rather not see. But when you have people surrounding you that really are just cheering you on and make it feel so safe to be open and honest, it makes all the difference. So friend, if you don't have a therapist or someone that you can be honest with, I really encourage you to look into that. Now, through my therapist, she hooked me up with a nutritionist, which, if I could be honest, I would have rather not had at all. My disordered self was like, I don't want to do that. I'll do all of the mind work, I'll look at my childhood issues, I'll admit all the bad things I've done because of my eating disorder or because of the pride that's inside of me, but make me change my food habits? Try to get me to gain weight? Yeah, I don't want to do that. That's what I thought at the time. But deep down, I knew I needed help because if I was going to heal, I had to heal physically as well. So begrudgingly, I went along with it. And along with my therapist, I also started meeting with a nutritionist. To this day, I still remember receiving that first email from the person I'd be working with, She sent me a food plan, something that was just an example of some of the bare minimums that she would be expecting of me. When I first opened the document and started reading through the various things for breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack, I was so overwhelmed and terrified that I literally wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I was exploding inside because the things that were written down for that meal plan felt like so much food to me at the time. For example, for one of the snacks, one of the small things between meals, she wanted me to eat a whole banana along with, I don't know, maybe it was some nuts, a yogurt. I can't even remember at this point. But what I was focused on was that banana. I was so deep into my eating disorder that the thought of even having a bite of a banana freaked me out. There were way too many sugars and carbs. Oh my gosh. Was there anything scarier than that? The fact that she wanted me to eat banana, let alone a whole banana, for a snack, not even for my meal, felt so unattainable for me. What I honestly wanted to do was what I was good at the time, which was complete avoidance. I wanted to make up excuses like, oh, sorry, I can't make our appointment. Something came up with work. Or I wanted to talk to my therapist and convince her, I don't really need this nutritionist thing. I'll figure it out on my own. I was looking for loopholes, any way that I could get out of it. But somewhere deep inside, I knew I have to do this. There is no option. The fact that I can't eat a banana for a snack is not okay, and I don't want my life to look like this anymore. So rather than running and avoiding, I emailed the nutritionist and told her what I was really feeling. Friend, that's something that I want to highlight. If you're struggling and you're working with a team who wants to help you get better, don't try to hide what's actually going on. I'll talk about this in a bit, but that was actually one of the pitfalls that I faced, was trying to hide the things that I was struggling with. I wanted to pretend that I was doing better than I actually was, and I would hide certain eating disorder behaviors because I was afraid of disappointing my team, my nutritionist, my therapist, whomever. So anyway, back to the nutritionist. I emailed her something like, I am really freaking out right now and I want to talk to you because this meal plan overwhelms me. I literally feel frozen, and some of the things that you have listed here are way outside of my abilities right now. She was totally understanding, and we decided to talk about it more in person. She wanted to know where I was so that she could start to make those baby steps with me to move forward. A lot of my time at that first nutritionist is a little bit of a blur because I was in such a disordered state. It's hard for me to remember all the details, but there are some things that I remember that feel so almost embarrassing to admit, but I want to bring them to the light because they were some of the things that held me back in my recovery. First of all, trying to keep the goals that my nutritionist set for me felt so unattainable that I kind of felt the obligation to start to stretch the truth a bit when I was reporting to her what I was actually eating. At the time, she was having me record and do a food log of everything that I was eating. Just having to write it down itself felt so triggering for me. But it was also something that she needed for data to know how I was doing. So as I was food logging, I would stretch the amounts. For example, if she wanted me to use 2 tablespoons of peanut butter on my toast, I'd find a loophole and use some kind of alternative peanut butter like PB2 that has way less fat and way less calories and made my eating disorder feel a little less loud and, while not okay with it, more okay with it than 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. I started to stretch the truth just a bit and I would get away with it, so it almost became a snowball effect. I knew it was wrong, but at the same time, I felt like I was stretching myself and eating more than I was before, so I justified it in my mind. Well, I actually didn't get away with it because when I'd go to my nutritionist, we would do weigh-ins. The weight was not going up at all. If anything, sometimes it would drop. Again, this is so embarrassing to even say this, but I was so concerned about making my team happy with me and avoiding the discomfort of admitting that I wasn't doing the goals that were set for me, that before I went into the nutritionist office, I would down so much water trying to put on some water weight so that it would show up on the scales. I'd also wear the heaviest clothes that I possibly could, and when she started to have me take my sweater or jacket off for the weigh-ins, I started to try to hide heavy objects in the pockets of my pants, things that you couldn't really see from the outside, just so it could add a little bit of weight to that scale. I know, it's totally wild, and it honestly makes me cringe. Even at the time, I felt so guilty about it, but the disorder had just monopolized my brain so much that it felt like it was making me do things that I hated. I hated it, but I couldn't stop. I've heard other people say this, and I totally relate, that it somewhat feels like you are being possessed by something outside of you. Not to get super spiritual on you, but it wouldn't surprise me if there literally are certain demons or spirits that are assigned to this specific illness. I'm not saying I was possessed and taken over by an evil spirit, but it kind of felt like there was this force, something that could take over my thought life and convince me that these things that I knew subconsciously were lies were so true. What shocks me is that it feels like a lot of people who suffer from eating disorders have the same exact thoughts or very similar behaviors. It's almost like C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. If you're not familiar with this book, there's a senior demon who is writing letters to a more junior demon, teaching him all the ways that he can manipulate humans and stop them from being a force for good in the world. When I was in my eating disorder and I would hear other people talking about all the thoughts that they were having and the things that they were doing, I remembered that book and I was like, oh my gosh, this feels just the same. It's almost like there is an eating disorder demon that is using some script for the lies they should put into sufferers' heads and the behaviors they should convince them to do. It was wild. Now, I'm not saying that people that are struggling with an eating disorder are possessed by demons, not in the least bit. What I am saying is that it does feel very spiritual. It feels like this is one of the ways that Satan and his forces of darkness want to manipulate people, get them so consumed inside of themselves and their own heads and disordered behaviors that it sucks and leeches off of their lives so that they can't experience the joy and peace God wants for them, and so that they can't be a force to be reckoned with in this world. This is why I am such an advocate for helping people break free from the eating disorder, because it's not only that I want them to have freedom around food and body, but also I want to help them cut the ties between whatever stronghold darkness has over them and to stop treating them like puppets, making them do things that they don't want to do. Like when I was lying about my food or trying to hide things from my team. It felt like I was doing the thing that I hated and I couldn't stop. So anyway, back to the nutritionist. There were so many good things that she brought to my recovery journey, and I did learn a lot of things from her, but somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't making progress with her. I had this deeper knowing that I just didn't think she was the right fit for me. I wasn't sure why, but it came from a pure place. I honestly feel like it was the Holy Spirit guiding me, telling me that there was someone else that would be a better fit for me. There was something about the nutritionist that I was working with where I just felt like I couldn't be 100% honest. Or she would say things that made me feel like she wanted me to gain weight to a certain point and then I could just manage. Whereas I wanted to work with someone who fully embraced intuitive eating and who truly believed in health at every size, which teaches that we each have our own natural set point weight range. And even though I didn't want to gain the weight, I also knew I needed an environment where I was encouraged to gain weight, maybe even above that set point weight, and learn to trust my body to get to the weight that it needed to be, naturally, on its own, not with me managing it in any way. So anyway, I talked to my therapist first, and she agreed that the reasons for me wanting the shift were good, and also she encouraged me to listen to that gut instinct, which I knew was the Holy Spirit. So I ended up getting a new nutritionist, which was so good for me. She was someone who I could be honest with, someone I could just open up with about my food fears or the fear of weight gain. And she would use science to help calm me down, show me what was true, and also challenge me when I needed to be challenged. Along with my nutritionist, another thing that really helped me in recovery was having a community of people around me, people who were going through recovery as well, that I could fight forward with, and I didn't have to explain my struggles. They just understood it. There were various online communities that I joined that were so crucial for my recovery efforts. First and foremost was the Recovery Warriors community. I just wanted to fill my brain with as much recovery material as I could, so I went to my podcast app and started searching, and it was the first thing that popped up. Jessica Flint, who is the founder and CEO of Recovery Warriors, was like a godsend to me. She named so many of the things that I was feeling inside and really had content that would push me to see things differently or to challenge my eating disorder thoughts or behaviors. So almost every spare moment I had, I filled my mind with Recovery Warriors content, along with some other podcasts and books like Goodbye Ed or The 8 Keys to Eating Disorder Recovery by Carolyn Costin. Somewhere along the way with all of my consumption of content, I became aware of an opportunity to join a community through Recovery Warriors called Make Magic Happen. It was their first online support group for eating disorder recovery. This community and being surrounded by other people who are also fighting their way through recovery was so crucial for me. It was kind of like being able to be in that outpatient setting where you could share stories and gain more insight and receive resources and tools to help you in your recovery journey. One of the biggest things of that online community that was so important for me was the community itself and having people who became like a sisterhood. There was one person in particular that I related to so much. Her name is Lizette, and she is amazing. While we were going through the program together, we got into the habit of sharing these Marco Polo videos with each other. We got to know each other so well, but also share what we were struggling with, along with the wins and what was working. For me, it was so awesome to feel so seen and known, and to feel like I had a friend where when I was struggling really deeply inside, or had things I didn't even want to admit to my own close friends and family, I could open up about it with Lizette. I could share with her and know there would be no judgment, but also that she would come back with whatever kind of word or encouragement that I needed to keep going. The beautiful thing about being in a community of people who are also struggling is that you can encourage each other. And just by watching each other challenge themselves helps you want to challenge yourself more as well. Seeing other people further along in the journey makes you feel like, oh, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. So anyway, along with the community aspect, being a part of that online community was also so key because it helped me understand my why. There were exercises and things that we did that wasn't just dealing with the eating disorder itself, but taking a look at our core values and what matters most in life. We also learned to dream and set goals for ourselves. Who are the people that we wanted to be 1 year from now? What are the goals that we can do to make ourselves take those small steps toward that person? For me, as I was going along this process, I was also digging deep into my relationship with God, and I knew my why had something to do with other people. I knew that this eating disorder recovery, the things I was learning, the baggage that I was bringing up to the surface and dealing with, the ways I was rewiring my mind and learning to be a warrior who guarded my thoughts, the way I was working to heal my relationship with my body, all of it, it was for a bigger why that was way bigger than me. I knew that God was going to use this darkness in my life for something so beautiful. One of the things that kept me fighting forward so hard was that I knew this was not for nothing. God would use this for good. And friend, that is true for you too. I want you to know that God does not want this for you, but He will use this for you and for the good of other people. It might not mean you're going to be a recovery coach or working in the area of eating disorder recovery, but you are gaining tools and insights and picking up things that will be so useful for whatever God has next for you. And even in this journey of recovery, God is using you through it. Trust Him in that. So anyway, being in community was so important for me because it helped me keep focused on my why, of why I was fighting forward. And it also helped me keep recovery a priority. It helps you be accountable. It helps you to want to keep fighting and know how to do it. The community aspect was so key to my recovery that I made a point of making sure that was something that carried forward through my whole journey. Not only did I have the team I was working with, my therapist, nutritionist, and later on a coach, but I also had these other communities. It started with that Make Magic Happen online support group, and then it turned into other things like the Courage Club, also hosted by Recovery Warriors. And I also did a program with Summer Inanen called You on Fire, which was not necessarily catered toward eating disorders, but people who struggled with body image. I also took another program through Isabel Foxenduke, who no longer is working in the eating disorder recovery space, but she was so huge in helping me understand intuitive eating and rewiring the way that I thought about bodies and weight gain and all that jazz. Every time I was entering into a different community or reading books or listening to podcasts, infiltrating my mind with all of this goodness, it felt like I was a warrior putting on the right battle armor to fight the war that I was currently in. It helped resource myself so I was strong enough to fight And also, it gave me the courage to see there was something else on the horizon, something that I was fighting for. So if there is one thing that I can say that really helped me in my recovery journey, and I know will be so helpful for yours, is to get the right people in your circle. Whether it's an in-person team, an online community, an in-person support group, whatever it looks like for you. Just get people in your corner to help you fight forward and keep taking those small steps to get you further in your recovery. Now, those are some of the things that helped me, but I also wanted to talk about some of the pitfalls. I already mentioned one of the pitfalls when I was working with my first nutritionist. I fell into the trap of being deceitful when it came to working with my team and letting them know where I was in my progress. So as hard as it is, I encourage you to be honest and forthcoming with wherever you are. If you're not making those challenges, be honest. But another pitfall that I fell into big time was busy recovery work. As helpful as it was to be in all of those communities that I mentioned and to take in all of the content out there, podcasts, YouTube videos, all those sorts of things. Everything was so helpful and I'm so glad I listened to them. But the pitfall that I fell into was that I felt like I was making progress because I was consuming this content, but then that wouldn't translate to my real life. For example, watching other people on YouTube challenge their food fears or see what they ate in a day was serving me in some sort of way, but it wasn't really helping me make any progress in my recovery journey because I wasn't doing the same thing. I think in my mind I thought it was helping me build courage so I could get to that point where I'd finally feel ready to do the food fears myself or to stop that eating disorder behavior, whatever it is that I was struggling with. But I was never going to feel ready. Recovery kind of looks like not feeling ready, but doing it anyway. Another way that I got stuck in the busy recovery work was honestly through compensating challenges. Again, I felt like I was making progress because I was like, woohoo, I did the food fear. I went for pizza for dinner. I had that bigger snack, whatever it was. But I would compensate throughout the day to make up for that challenge. Oh, you're having pizza later tonight? That means you have to get some extra steps in today. Things like that. Or I'd challenge myself to up my intake, but I'd be kind of disordered about it. For example, if one of the challenges was to go eat a protein bar, I would try to find one that appeased my eating disorder a bit, like it has lower sugar or lower carbs, or high fiber and high protein. Things that made my eating disorder think, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. I can't believe you're making me have a snack. But okay, if you're going to make me, let's try to find something that feels a little less scary. It would fight me, but it wouldn't fight me quite as hard as long as I played by the eating disorder's rules. It was really sneaky. Or using that protein bar example, it would make me feel like I was making progress because I was saying yes to recovery by saying, you know what? My eating disorder doesn't want me to eat this protein bar for a snack. It's saying that my lunch was too big, but I'm going to do it anyway. But I would start to compensate and not challenge myself quite so much because I would compromise and only eat half of the protein bar. But because I was negotiating with the eating disorder, it was keeping me stuck. The busy recovery work was a big pitfall for me because it really drew out my recovery process and honestly probably made it a lot longer than it needed to be because it felt like I was putting one toe in and jumping backwards, refusing to jump into the recovery pool. I was testing the waters, but I didn't want to swim yet. But I was still getting wet. I still had my swimming suit on, so it felt like I'm in recovery. But looking back, I can see how I made things way harder on myself. So my advice to you is to watch out for those times when you're stuck in that busy recovery work, where you think you're making progress, but really you're compensating, or you're negotiating in some way with your eating disorder. It's still good that you're making progress, and I still think it's helping you move forward in some way, but it's still holding you back because you're still listening to the eating disorder. Be ruthless as much as you can. Draw a line in the sand and say, I refuse to listen to you, and I'm going to do the recovery step even though it feels painful. Another huge pitfall, or not even pitfall, but just a major block in my recovery, in big time, was fear. Namely, the fear of weight gain. I definitely had food fears where certain foods felt way scarier than others. I remember times when I would be stepping up to a food challenge and feel like a wave of anxiety rushed over me and I wanted to just crawl out of my skin. But underneath the fear of food fears was really the fear of weight gain. I was afraid that certain foods would make me fat, or that they would make me gain fat in a way that I didn't want to gain it. Like I would gain more stomach fat if I ate too many carbs or too many sugars. The fear of weight gain and not being able to control how it came on was really the source of so many stumbling blocks in my recovery journey. As much as the whole concept of health at every size and intuitive eating was really helpful for me, and I believed in it so much, for me, I always felt like I'm the unicorn. It won't work for me. Sure, there's this natural set point for everybody else, somewhere where the body will stop gaining weight. But for me, I would just continue to gain and gain and gain, or that my hunger would never be satisfied, that I would become addicted to certain foods, or that by giving myself allowance with food, I'd form some bad behaviors. Like, oh my gosh, am I going to eat dessert every single night and in these quantities? It felt like maybe that would die down for other people, but it wouldn't die down for me. Again, I was the unicorn. Friend, let me just call this out right now that a lot of us struggle with this whole unicorn syndrome. It's one of those things that comes from that eating disorder playbook where we think that even if we believe it's true for everyone else, we're the exception. Yeah, that's a lie. So don't buy into it. So the fear of weight gain was a huge one for me. And if we go even deeper than that, the fear of weight gain really stems from the fear of judgment from other people. I was terrified of what other people would think of me if I gained weight. I thought that they would think I was less attractive in a bigger body, which made me feel gross because I'm such a huge advocate for health at every size and breaking free from diet culture and our society's thin ideal. They were huge values of mine, so fearing that I wouldn't be attractive was really kind of a hard thing for me to sit with. I also feared they would look at me differently, like they would question my credibility or that I would be disregarded and people wouldn't want to hear what I had to say anymore. I felt like I would lose respect, or even worse, I felt like I would be pitied, that there would be people that would say, oh my gosh, what happened to Rachel? She was way more awesome before she gained weight. Wow, she let herself go. The idea that people would be judging me and have negative things to say about me, even if I never heard them, but just that they thought them, really stressed me out. So along with this fear of weight gain and fear of judgment, I also was really struggling with my relationship with my body. In the earlier stages of recovery, I felt like my body was kind of the enemy, like it was fighting against me, not for me. At some point in my recovery, I realized I had it all wrong. My body wasn't the enemy. It was honestly my protector. The things that I was resisting, like weight gain, were the things that my body was trying to do to make me healthier again. And also, I was the one that was bringing harm to my body. If anyone was the enemy, it was me against my body. But during recovery, it's really hard to have a healthy body image, especially when you're gaining weight. I heard from many people that the whole body image thing is one of the hardest things to get through in recovery, and it's one of the last things to go. For me personally, that is also true, but I also know in my journey, when I would hear people say that, it didn't really help me all that much. I'd be like, oh great, so I'm gonna get bigger, and then I'm just gonna have a horrible relationship with my body. It's the last thing to go, so as I'm gaining weight, I'm gonna still have to fight this anyway. What's even the point of gaining weight then? It's only gonna get harder. If you're having that thought, I just wanna reassure you that it gets so much easier. For me, after I weight restored, I still struggled with body image, but it was nothing like before. Before I started really trying to actively gain weight, my mind was so consumed with body image. As I gained weight, some of that started to naturally just go away on its own. It's like having more nutrition and having my body click into the reality that, oh, there's more things coming in now. We're no longer in a famine season. It's like my brain started to have less and less of the fears and rumination over my body just by gaining weight. There were obviously so many things I needed to work through and make progress on in terms of body image, but having a more restored body made that so much easier. In addition, another pitfall that I fell into was the whole doing recovery really hard during the week and then relaxing on the weekends. It kind of mirrored how I was back in the denial phase, when I would work really hard or try to be super healthy during the week and then let loose on the weekends. In my recovery, how that showed up is that I would work so hard, working at all of my goals during the week, but during the weekends, I felt like I deserve a break. And so eating disorder behaviors would slip back in. I would do things that just weren't setting me up for success. For example, if my husband and I went out to dinner and had some drinks, it's like the buzz of the alcohol desensitized me because I would feel like I was eating so much more than I actually was, or it made it just easier to compensate or convince myself not to push too hard. I'd believe things like, oh, you deserve to just take a break. It's fine. You'll make up for it tomorrow. On the weekends, it also felt a little bit more sporadic because we would be eating out more. And just by eating out more, it would make me feel like I was eating so much more than I was actually eating. So I would compromise thinking I was challenging myself because I was going out to these harder dinners. But in actuality, I was probably eating less food and less calories than I was actually eating during the week. And with the whole drinking thing itself, for some reason, my eating disorder would tell me that it's okay to skimp on the food because I was drinking more calories. But realistically, the calories that I was consuming through alcohol weren't things that my body actually needed to repair. So I was gypping it of the nutrition it actually needed to help me heal, and it also convinced me to eat less of the thing that I actually needed. On top of that, on the weekends, I was way more active. Even if I was working on cutting back my movement, it's like I didn't care about my step count during the weekend. It started to become this addictive thing where I would get more steps during the weekend to make myself feel better for the less activity that I was doing during the week, and also to make up for those food challenges that I was doing. For quite a while in my recovery, it kind of looked like that, where I would be pushing the gas during the week, but then I would slide back during the weekends. It was something that my recovery team definitely picked up on. But again, the disorder would convince me it wasn't that big of a deal, or they were just blowing things out of proportion, or I've got this, I'm still making progress, whatever. Just forget about their concerns. Regardless of the pitfalls that I talked about and others that I haven't mentioned, I still continued to make progress in my recovery journey. Even though I was still at a point where I had so many food fears and was hating on my body, some things were getting easier, and I was continuing to up my food intake. In addition, I was gaining some weight. Even with my 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, I was still heading forward in the right direction. The thing is, I got so stuck in the phase of quasi recovery. I got to a point where I was so saturated in the recovery world that some of the mental habits had started to change. And in addition, I had gained enough weight that it no longer felt like my brain was just in this crazy space. I had gained some weight and I'd gotten rid of some of my behaviors, especially most of the overt behaviors, like I wasn't binging or purging or restricting hardcore, but I was still struggling. I was eating more, but I was still weird with food. I still had food rules, and there were still so many foods that were still bad according to my eating disorder. But I tried to just push those facts aside because I was eating more, and I had overcome some of my food fears. I also was so stuck in this habit of trying to control my weight gain. I had started to convince myself that there were certain foods that I could eat that would help me gain weight in a better way than other foods. I also sort of convinced myself that I just didn't need to challenge certain foods. I was still too terrified to eat certain things like fast food or things that were higher in fat or carbs or sugar. But I convinced myself I didn't like them or I didn't want to be the kind of person that ate those foods. I was fine with the limited food choices that I was already eating. Part of me knew it was disordered, and I wanted to be free. I didn't want to have certain food that had control over me. I didn't want to be afraid of any kind of food. I wanted to be the kind of person that could eat whatever was in front of me, even if I didn't like it. But there was another part of me that thought, this is fine. You can manage like this. It's okay if you don't eat those types of foods. Some of those aren't even healthy anyway. You're just being healthy. Also, there's other people that restrict those types of foods. Why can't you? I would negotiate myself out of full recovery because I thought, I can be fine here. I mean, it's not ideal. I'm not fully recovered, but I think I can live with this. I thought being just a little bit disordered, but still being able to hold on to a smaller body was better for me. I knew that wasn't true deep down, but I also felt attached to having that smaller body. I didn't want to give myself full permission because I was afraid of what that would mean for my body, for weight gain, for how life would look at the end of all this. During this quasi-recovery phase, I not only was still weird with food, but there also were times when weird behaviors would start to slip in. For example, if Sean and I were out on the weekends, we would be walking a lot. And one of the hobbies that I started to pick up was that we would stop at loads of different bakeries throughout the city. Part of me thought, oh, this is good. I'm going to bakeries and challenging myself to eat things like cookies or cake and things that my eating disorder wouldn't want me to have. But I was still being disordered with them because I would only allow myself to eat a little portion of it, just enough so that my eating disorder wouldn't totally ruin my entire day. And even then, a lot of times it did have something to say. But even worse than that, there was a season when I struggled with a behavior that felt so mortifying. It was so embarrassing to even admit to myself, let alone my recovery team. I got into the habit, especially after days where I was walking loads and loads, where those treats where I had only permitted myself to have just a little bit, just enough so that the eating disorder wouldn't scream. Well, I would go to town on them. It felt like almost a binge in some way. It was like I couldn't stop myself. And as it was happening, there would be so much fear that was just ripping through my body that I would panic and I would just spit it out into the sink or the trash. I knew it was wrong. I knew that people that are normal with food don't do that sort of thing. And it also felt like I had to hide it. It was something so shameful. I didn't want anyone to know I was doing that. But that habit started to kick in and it started to become more of a normal thing where I'd have this chew and spit behavior. And the eating disorder just loved it. It was like, oh, I can have those things, but I don't have to consume them. Friend, if you are doing this behavior and feeling so ashamed of it, I just want to normalize it a little bit that this is something other people struggle with as well. But I also want to encourage you to be honest about it. This is not something that your future self wants to be doing. This is not something that your recovered self will do. So call it out for what it is. And secondly, I want you to be honest with someone else about it. For me, I brought it to my team because I couldn't deal with it any longer. I wanted something different, and I knew it was holding me back. So don't sit in shame about it and keep it in secret, but be honest about it. See it as an obstacle you need to overcome, something that is blocking you from a better life. So anyway, in that quasi recovery phase, another thing that started to pick up was my compulsive walking habit. The harder I pushed with food and recovery efforts in that way, the more this compulsion started to grow. It was like walking gave me permission to be able to eat. And it got to the point where I only felt okay if I was able to walk. And if I didn't, I would feel so anxious. I'd convince myself it's not that big of a deal, it's just walking. And I'd also think exercise is healthy for us. It's for my mental health. It was a way that I could manage my anxiety, which was definitely on the uptick as I was pulling out the roots of my eating disorder. The walking gave me respite from having to fight all the time. While these things are true, in that season, walking wasn't healthy for me. For a healthy person who isn't struggling with an eating disorder, walking is a great form of exercise. As a recovered person, now walking is something that brings me so much peace in my day. But when I was disordered, the walking was something that was getting in the way of my recovery. For one, if I was truly honest, I knew the walking was to offset food challenges I had done that day. As long as I was walking, it made it feel okay to do certain things. Also, the walking was getting a little out of hand. I knew logically, okay, this isn't good. I really need to cut back or even stop activity, but I just couldn't. It started to feel like this compulsion where I had to do it. Honestly, it was starting to take up so many hours of the day, which was really not sustainable, nor was it something that I wanted in my life. I didn't want to spend hours a day walking, but I justified it because, like restriction, it gave me some sense of control. It made the eating disorder happy, so my brain felt at peace. I really needed to detach the relationship between food and exercise. It wasn't healthy for me to think that I could only eat certain things as long as I exercised. That wasn't something that a healthy-brained person would be thinking. So anyway, I was in this quasi-recovery phase for I don't even know how many years. I was healthier and people were a little bit less worried about me, but they also were like, is Rachel ever going to recover? Is she always going to be kind of weird with food? I didn't want to be in quasi-recovery. I knew I wasn't fully healed, but I just didn't know if that was possible for me. In the back of my brain, I felt like I was just one of those persons that would struggle with this forever. But at the same time, I had a deeper conviction that I was going to heal, that there was an end to this. As long as the recovery process was taking, I knew that I was going to be someone who was going to be fully recovered. God had given me that word and assurance so many times that I was just not willing to accept anything except for full recovery. So I kept on fighting. However, my recovery journey took a bit of a U-turn when COVID hit. For anyone in this season, anxiety and emotions were so high. And for people that were struggling with an eating disorder, something that does not do well in isolation and high stress, it just made things so difficult. I had the tools and I thought that I was doing my best, but somewhere along the line, I started slipping. Eating disorders are a way of coping with anxiety. They're an anxiety disorder. So it makes sense that I did slip back. But I think the scary part for me was that I didn't see it happening. It wasn't until this one day when my nutritionist sat me down for a real talk and told me, Rachel, you have lost quite a bit of weight. You are currently at the weight that you were a couple years ago. You see, at the time, my nutritionist was having Sean do blind weigh-ins with me, and then he would email her the results. I never knew my weight. I never had that information because it just wasn't helpful for me to know what my weight was. When she told me that I had lost weight, I couldn't believe it. I honestly thought that I had been gaining weight. I think that all of the anxiety and stress had added to my body dysmorphia, so I thought that I was gaining weight, when in actuality I wasn't at all. It was quite the opposite. Hearing her tell me that, it was like a wake-up call where I'm like, oh gosh, we can't compromise anymore. We need to get serious. It was a kick in the butt for me to really hit the gas pedal. I couldn't just cruise. At this juncture in my journey, during the whole pandemic season, it took me quite a bit of time to realize it, but I was struggling with depression. It literally took listening to a podcast where someone was talking about it, listing off the symptoms, for me to be like, oh my gosh, every single thing she's mentioning, I deal with that. It was something that was really hard for me to name for myself, but once I did, I opened up with my recovery team about that, because ever since that oh shoot, I lost weight, I need to get things into gear moment, I started to be so transparent with my team. It felt like I had been tricked in some way, like I hadn't even realized that I was slipping and the eating disorder was gaining ground. And so I was at that point where I'm putting all the cards on the table. I wanted to use my team in the way that I wished I would have years ago to really be transparent and honest and go after this eating disorder together. I was honest with my nutritionist and therapist at the time, really sharing how I was feeling, and not only depressed, but struggling with anxiety and at times very apathetic. Like it just felt like nothing was ever going to get better. And sometimes I just felt so numb to life. My team strongly encouraged me to consider taking some medication, which honestly, I resisted for a while. I think it was weeks, maybe even months of me being encouraged by them to consider the option before I was even willing to really approach that as a reality. Looking back, I think for me, there was some sort of stigma around taking medication. I didn't really judge anyone for taking medication. I knew there were times when it was very necessary, but for some reason, again, I felt like that unicorn where it didn't apply to me. I think some of the upbringing and messaging around Christian circles really had an impact on me. I'm not saying all Christians believe this, but at least some of the circles that I had been exposed to really made it feel like if you took medication, you weren't trusting God. It felt like if you took medication, you were a weak Christian. It was almost like you didn't trust God enough to deal with it. More so than that, I think, though, for me, I was afraid the medication was going to be addicting. Taking an antidepressant or some anxiety medication felt so foreign to me, so scary. I was afraid that if I got on it, it'd be hard to get off. But despite my fears, I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I really just have to trust that these people know what they're talking about. And also, after praying about it with God, I just really got to the place where I felt like that was my next step. So long story short, I went on the medication and oh my gosh, it was so necessary. It's really hard to explain how it felt, or I don't even know if I really noticed when it started to work. It was so gradual. But at some point I realized, oh wait, I'm actually able to do the recovery things that I want to do. It's almost like the medication gave me some space, those few split seconds in my brain where my healthy self could step in and say, oh, this is scary, but we're doing it anyway. Anxiety was no longer crushing my process, and it felt like it gave me the reins back. It enabled me to fight the way that I wanted to fight. So the medication for me was a huge help in my recovery, but probably the biggest help of all was when I hired on a recovery coach. I remember exactly where I was in my bathroom in San Francisco. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I got this thought, this idea that I needed to reach out to the person I was watching on YouTube. I was watching What Mia Did Next, hosted by Mia Findlay, and she was someone who had been on my recovery journey since pretty much the beginning. I just loved Mia because I loved watching her journey and all the insights and help that she would share, things that helped her get to the place where she was fully recovered. But it was also so encouraging because she was fully recovered. She was one of those persons that was out there showing people in recovery that full recovery is possible. So anyway, I had that moment with the Holy Spirit. It really felt like God had a message hand-delivered from heaven to me to encourage me to reach out to Mia. In my logical brain, I was like, okay, that's weird because I know for a fact that Mia has mentioned that her wait list is so long. And I am almost positive that even if I reach out to her asking her for help, she won't have the time available. But regardless, I reached out to her. And wouldn't you know, yes, Mia did have a long wait list. And she had loads of clients. But it just so happened that Mia had some availability in the time slot that I was looking for. As soon as I got that email from her, I just laughed and was like, God, you're so amazing. You make a way. I should have never doubted you or that this would pan out. Working with Mia was literally the turning point in my recovery journey. I was at a place where I was ready to work with a coach. I was no longer willing to settle for quasi recovery. I knew that full recovery was possible and that there was an end to this struggle for me, but I needed help. Someone that would keep me accountable and hold my hand to get me to the finish line. I needed help with all the fears or doubts or things that I was questioning and needed some reinforcements to help me do the things that I was still struggling to do, like challenging certain foods or challenging certain amounts. So with Mia, I started to take all of the recovery knowledge and start putting it into action. Instead of just watching the YouTube videos, I was the girl doing those food challenges. Mia met me where I was at, and she worked with me to find a rhythm where I could fight and keep pushing myself without feeling so much pressure that I would just get stuck. It felt like I was continually making progress, and a lot of that progress happened by setting really small goals and continuing to add on to those goals week by week. I started small, but eventually it did start to snowball, and I was making really great progress. One of the biggest things for me was having someone like Mia who I could tell all of my fears to. And she could not only provide me with empathy because she had been there too, and some good fuel to fight off those lies or fears or whatever I was dealing with, but also she gave me the tools to be able to fight for myself. One huge way that I learned to fight was by dialoguing with my eating disorder. I literally would have to talk and fight back with the eating disorder. I'd take out my journal, write down the fear, or write down the thoughts that were keeping me stuck and wanting to keep me reaching for that disordered behavior, or the things that made me feel like weight gain is the worst thing ever, or that people would judge me, whatever the thing was. I would take those thoughts and fears, put them out there, and face them. I would let my eating disorder name all the things that it thought was true, but then my healthy self would come in and combat those lies. It was a dialogue back and forth, and through the process of dialoguing and facing the things that I was thinking, facing the fears I was feeling, it helped me gain more access to my healthy voice, the deeper, truer, radiant self that I had inside, the girl that I was fighting for. The girl that God made me to be. She was fierce inside, and as I started to access her, her voice started to strengthen, so much so that over time, my healthy voice, my healthy self, my radiant self That voice sounded so much truer to me than the eating disorder's lies. So, at this part in my journey, I was fighting the good fight. I was sick of quasi recovery, and I was ready to do whatever it takes to just be done and close the door on this season. I wanted the eating disorder to be something of my past, and I wasn't willing to stop until that was a reality. All the recovery work that I had done up until that point had laid the foundation, and hiring a recovery coach was really a turning point in my journey when I really started fighting in a way I had never fought before, where there was no return, there was no looking back. I started to realize, oh yes, recovery is possible, and I can get there if I keep fighting, if I keep just doing the work. God had already shown me in so many ways that there really was an end to this recovery journey for me, that I would be fully recovered at some point. But it wasn't willpower and grit and my own determination that helped me get to full recovery. I mean, that was part of it, but really the key factor to all of my journey was honestly God and His power. A few months after working with my recovery coach, there actually was a moment, a pivotal point in my journey, where God showed up in such a big way to not only show me, oh yes, Rachel, you're going to recover, but also that it was going to happen soon and it was going to happen fast. In my next and final video, I want to share the experience that I had with God. Something that was so supernatural and really was the thing that pushed me out of quasi recovery into full on, full in, all in recovery. I'll be sharing that personal story up next and also really diving into all in recovery and what that looked like. For me, all in recovery was the most fruitful and effective point of my recovery journey. It was also the messiest part because I was going head to head with the fears that had held me back for so long. It was messy and it was scary, but like I said, it was so fruitful. I want to share this piece of my journey as well, because if you're like me and you're not currently in all in recovery, you might be wondering, oh my gosh, could I even handle that? And what does that even look like? Well, I'll give you some insight into those things in the next and final part of this series. I'll see you in part 4.